Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So tonight I'm not going to waste any time, and we are going to continue the story. As you know, United States and Iran conducted and launched a series of coordinated attacks on Iran, and that is what has happened. So in the last video, I surmised and predicted that attacks were likely imminent, but was hoping for a peaceful resolution. But when I woke up this morning, I read reports and stories and headlines that attack did occur. So there were joint strikes that I think, when we think about it, is quite regrettable, because there were joint strikes that hit a school for little girls in Iran, and what that did was it unalived nearly 60 girls. So that's quite saddening. As you know, for me, I always stand with the children and believe that their welfare is most important. So that was saddening to hear. But as a result of those strikes, Iran launched retaliatory strikes hitting several U.S. bases in the Middle East. So there was strikes in the United Arab Emirates. There was strikes in Qatar and Bahrain. So there was strikes in multiple places in the Middle East. Now, there are conflicting reports as to whether or not the Iranian supreme leader, the Ayatollah, I think it's Ali Khamenei, is deceased. The Iranian foreign minister states that the Ayatollah is, quote, safe, sound, and alive, end quote. However, about 23 minutes ago, I checked the reporting and discovered that Trump posted on his Truth Social account that the Ayatollah is deceased. This is consistent with the reports coming from Israel, and so the magnitude of this statement appears to hold a bit of credence. Again, when I watched the interview with the Iranian foreign minister, he didn't appear to be confident in the statement that he gave that the supreme leader was alive. Just the body language and the tone in his voice, it didn't appear as if it was a confident yes that he was alive. That does not mean that he is deceased, but we are getting conflicting reports. So as soon as there is an update, I will be sure to give you that update. Now, how did we get here? Because when we last checked and when we last were listening to reports, Iran and the United States and Israel were in negotiations about what appeared to be its nuclear weapons system, right? And so how did we get here? So according to the foreign ministers for Iran, he appears to be perplexed by the fact that the U.S. president or the United States pretended to engage in negotiations and then launched an attack. And this is coming from an interview, I believe, that NBC News interviewed him, and he said that he thought that the meeting was good in Geneva, and he was under the impression that the Iran and U.S. these negotiations resolve some of the important concerns that both nations had. I can't help but to state that I believe, this is just my personal opinion, but I don't think that the Iranian foreign minister is really qualified for that position. And that could be, a rush to judgment. Maybe it is the language barrier. I mean, he speaks really good English, but it was just the interview that he gave that made me feel like, okay, like, is he qualified to be in this particular position? For example, like, if I were on the other side of these attacks, like, the last thing that I would be doing is holding a press conference with the country that attacked me. Now, keep in mind, I'm not in support of the Iranian regime. I am not sympathetic to the government of Iran. I've been very critical of the Iranian government, but this is a adversarial channel, and so Kiana's shelf is adversarial, and looking at it from a different perspective, like, I don't think that I would be, holding a press conference with a country that has been aggressive. And I think that signals, at least in my eyes, the inexperience that this foreign minister has, and the lack of not being apperceptive, and so the inexperience, not being apperceptive, and also, of course, just not taking the time out to structure, or not necessarily structure, but not taking the time out to regroup and to figure out, where to go from there. That's just my personal opinion. And again, especially minutes after it happened, perhaps later engage in these discussions and engage in these conversations about what's happening in your territory. But I think that this is what separates Israel and U.S. apart from these states in the Middle East, is that the United States appears to be more experienced with media relations and holding its cards to its chest, whereas the Iranian government and some of its people, what they do is they engage in this boasting, I guess, in an attempt to save face, but really never helps out their position. And so that's just my opinion. Some may argue that I'm wrong about that. So next, he argues that the attack was unprovoked, illegitimate, and against international law. And so my question is, where has he been? This is another indication to me that he lacks the experience of a foreign minister. Where has he been? Like, when you go to war, there is always going to be states that don't abide by international law. That's just how it has always gone down in history. That does not make it right. That does not mean that countries should shirk its responsibility to adhere to the United Nations Charter, etc. But as we know, that when things are tense in countries, when they're when their interests are compromised and threatened, that they're not thinking about international law. So it's almost painful for me to watch him sleep at the wheel, relying on international norms, not understanding that really when there are acts of aggression and interest at play, that international norms don't come to the forefront. This is often secondary, and it's more so of a bargaining tool, but it is not necessarily mandatory. And we're starting to see that develop within like the last year, 2 years, that international law is becoming softer and softer and softer. And so this, I think, to reiterate, I am not in support of the Iranian regime, and I'm looking at this from the perspective of a critical, previous postgraduate law student who has studied international law and then has kept a close watch on these headlines, media relations, and understanding. When I was in undergrad, I took a public relations class, and so I understand that the foreign minister is trying to give cover for his regime. But again, I think that the last thing that I would do in this kind of circumstance would be giving a press conference to the country that has attacked me. I would be trying to regroup and figure out how did that happen. But again, there does appear to be some contradictions, because in 2025, Trump did claim the nuclear systems were obliterated. Yet today, NBC is asking questions about whether there is the resumption of nuclear building. The foreign minister asserts and reassures NBC that that is not the case, that they're not attempting to rebuild their nuclear systems, but perhaps there is intelligence. Again, I'm not an intelligence officer. I'm not in the military, so I don't know the intelligence that they have. And so I can't make a determination on that. But it's important to note that other reports state that this attack was about obliterating the missile systems. So whereas back last year in 2025 of June, that was about the nuclear systems, this particular attack was about the missile systems. Now, the Iranian foreign minister takes us back in this conversation with NBC to 2015, where he believed diplomatic relations and negotiations were made with, quote, significant progress, end quote, proving that there was goodwill and this continuous assessment of its nuclear supply. But it appears that the United States and Israel are concerned with nuclear weapons because, to reiterate, Iran, as we all know, is not part of NATO, which is thought to be bound by this no first use declaration. But some argue that NATO has refused to make such a declaration, and there has been political commentary from political influencers, social media influencers, that believe that if the U.S. is not bounded by such a declaration, U.S. and Israel, if they're not bounded by such a declaration, then how can they expect other countries to also be bounded by that? And I think that that is an important question, because I think our goal in the world today is peace. And I think that for most of us, that we don't want to see or hear that there are missiles flying across the sky and hurting any group of people. And what's unfortunate is that when I watched the interview with the foreign minister of Iran, he didn't really appear to be concerned in his tone and demeanor about the people of Iran or the military officials. I mean, he did say, that there was approximately 60 young girls that were unalived in these attacks, but it didn't appear to me to be convincing that he was very concerned about their lives or the lives of the military officials. Like, for instance, he said that a couple of military officials lost their lives, and he was like, well, I'm paraphrasing, but he said it's something to that effect. And I was like, you don't care that, like, people around you are being unalived? And that's not to say that there is a need to retaliate, but like, I'm understanding. I mean, I guess I'm grappling with, right? I'm grappling with where is the emotion, and perhaps he has been through this many times before, that he has just lost emotion, right? Maybe this has happened so many times where people around him are losing their lives that he just doesn't have any more emotion. And so at this juncture, it's difficult to tell if the U.S. and Israel has outpunched Iran. But to reiterate, the reports are stating that, and Donald Trump has posted to his Truth Social account, that the Ayatollah is deceased. So I will continue to keep an eye on this reporting and then report back to you. But again, so the U.S. government, the Department of War, is calling this Operation Epic Fury. But I don't see it like that. I think that this is Operation Jolly Sailor Bold. Let me take you back. So I think that the interview that NBC did with the foreign minister of Iran proves that this is sort of U.S. The Department of War can call it whatever they want. I mean, they're in charge, of course. I'm just a citizen of the United States without any power. But if you watch that interview with the foreign minister of Iran, he actually explains my theory of Operation Jolly Sailor Boat. So there is these negotiations where they have engaged in several negotiation talks, this seductive principle that is like the mermaid in the sea that comes up to the boat. And again, this foreign minister appears to be that sailor that is on that boat, and that mermaid is the U.S. approaching this sailor, because that foreign minister appears to be seduced by those conversations. And if you listen to that interview, he appeared to be blindsided or shocked by the fact that this attack came, even after those negotiations took place. I think he was talking about some negotiations that took place, about a week ago, leaving from those conversations thinking that those conversations went well. He was of the opinion that those conversations were, that they had reached an agreement. And again, the seduction principle there, thinking that there was an agreement, and then what happened? There was an attack. Now, I think a reasonable and prudent person watching this unfold, how the U.S. positioned all of its U.S. naval warships around Iran, would come to the conclusion that war was imminent. Again, like in the Pirates of the Caribbean, those sailors in that boat knew that mermaids were aggressive. And so when they surrounded that boat, although they were beautiful and appeared to be docile, they, were there to attack. And I think a reasonable and prudent person would know that the U.S. would not have arrived to the shores of Iran without its boats, had it intended on engaging in peaceful diplomatic talks without engaging in an attack. You're bringing your boats there because you intend to use those boats for an attack. And so I guess he felt he was blindsided by that, but I think most people would say, how were you? And this I think supports my argument that this person is really inexperienced and probably should have never been in that particular position to begin with. And so there are, let's see. So the aftermath, let's talk about the aftermath. So the aftermath of, excuse me, sorry. The aftermath of this attack, we've seen activists have taken to the streets of New York calling for a ceasefire. I'm pretty sure that activists have taken to the streets in other cities in the United States, and legislatures in the United States are urging a vote on the War Powers Resolution. Whether or not that works or not, it remains to be seen, because the president has the power to engage in war if the president believes that there is an imminent attack. Like, those are part of the presidential executive powers. And I know that the legislatures in the United States understand that, but of course they want to show the American people that they can rein Trump in and put some guardrails on those powers, or lessen those powers. But we'll see. We'll see if the legislation is going to have some teeth, and I think that what some of the politicians have stated in the U.S. is that with this resolution, you get to see who votes for it and who doesn't. And I think that in a way that is quite powerful, because that gives voters the opportunity to choose elected officials who either engage in war or those who don't. those who are pro-war can choose those elected officials who didn't vote for it, and those who are anti-war can choose officials that did vote for it. There has also been a Security Council members meeting, like an emergency meeting called by the members of the Security Council, and so we'll see what comes from that. That is supposed to happen on Monday. So today is Saturday. There's still a day in between on Sunday. I'm not sure if there's going to be any more attacks on Sunday, but there is a Security Council meeting convening on Monday. What are the implications, you might ask? What are the implications of the attack on Iran? I think that the number one implication regarding the attack on Iran is more directed surveillance. Yes. So what's regrettable about when these international conflicts happen is that there is this institutional paranoia that happens where states often I guess become, there's this, what happens is that these states tend to profile certain people because they believe that there is going to be retaliation. And whether or not that's justified, I don't really think that it's justified, but then I think that the more attacks happen, the more countries feel that there is going to be retaliation from people who are sympathetic to regimes like Iran, and thus they engage in a high level of surveillance of people that don't deserve to be surveilled. And I think that that's just really unfortunate because those resources could really be allocated and directed toward other situations where people are missing and crimes are happening that really warrant a significant amount of surveillance. And to reiterate, what's regrettable about surveillance or what's regrettable about international conflicts is that this gives governments the authority and the power to thrust people under surveillance. Now, some questions. Will Iran have to reforge their regime, or can this be de-escalated? Will the people of the Middle East continue to hear the rapid plan of missiles landing on their soil is a question. Now, Trump has called the Iranian people to the streets to take back their country. Will there be a mobocracy in Iran from this point forward is a question that I want to know. This video has gone on long enough. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.